The year 1820 arrived in Northumberland on a blade of wind. It scoured the high moors and bent the gnarled oaks that clung to the edges of the Wrenburn estate. The house itself, a severe block of grey stone, seemed to have been born of the rock on which it stood, bracing itself against the season. Winter was not a guest here. It was the master. It laid a frost like a shroud over the fallow fields, and breathed its chill into the very marrow of the house, seeping through thick walls and under heavy doors. Inside, the cold had its own hierarchy. In the great hall, a fire roared, its heat a privilege for the few who passed through. In the kitchens, it was a frantic, steamy warmth born of labour. But in the passages, the sculleries, the forgotten corners where much of the work was done, the cold was a settled, personal thing. It clung to the stone flags and the damp air, a constant companion to those who lived in the shadows. One of those shadows was a young woman named Pippa, or at least that was the name she answered to. It was a small, quick name, a name for a creature that scurried and served, and was not meant to be looked at too closely. To the other servants, she was simply Pippa. To the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, she was a pair of hands, quiet and efficient. To the Duke of Velmore, Master of Wrenburn, she was nothing at all. A fleeting shape in a dark dress glimpsed at the end of a long corridor, already forgotten. To his ward, the beautiful and brittle Miss Camilla Cromer, she was a reminder of things best left buried, and for that she was an object of casual, persistent cruelty. Pippa knew her place. She knew that the scullery was her domain, a world of steam and rough soap, and the endless cycle of soiled dishes. She knew the geography of the great house, not by its grand rooms, but by its arteries, the servants' stairs, the back passages, the doors that opened onto the cold yards. She knew that Mrs. Gable took her tea at precisely 6 each morning, strong and without sugar. She knew that the second footman, Thomas, was saving his wages to bring his sister down from Newcastle. She knew that Miss Cromer's laughter, a sound like breaking glass, often preceded a moment of pain for someone lower down the ladder. She collected these small truths like a magpie, storing them away. They were her currency, her map of the world. They kept her safe. To be unnoticed was to be safe. She did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that tears were exactly what Camilla wanted. Instead, she had learned to become still, to let the barbs and slights wash over her. She would retreat into the quiet fortress of her own mind, a place where she was not Pippa, the scullery maid with chapped hands and a perpetually downcast gaze. In there, she was someone else, a girl who remembered the scent of leather and wild thyme, the weight of a bird on her wrist, a father's low, rumbling laugh. These memories were ghosts, hazy and indistinct, but they were hers alone. The master of the house, Nicholas, the 7th Duke of Velmore, was a ghost of a different sort. He was a tall, severe man in his early 30s, with a face that seemed carved from the same unforgiving stone as his home. His eyes were the grey of a winter sky just before a storm, and they missed nothing. He had inherited the title and the vast, unmanageable lands 2 years prior, and with them a grief that had settled into him as deeply as the winter cold had settled into Wrenburn. He moved through the house with a heavy, silent tread, his presence a palpable weight. He spoke little, smiled less, and seemed to find his only solace in the wild, open expanse of the moors with his birds. His falcons were his obsession, and the prize of his muse, his torment and his pride, was a great white gerfalcon, a creature of breathtaking savagery and beauty. He called him Storm. The bird had been a gift from a Russian prince, a king in feathered form, and he was as untamable as the winds he was born to. He had savaged 2 underkeepers, and would not suffer the touch of any but the Duke himself, and even that was a tense, grudging acceptance. One afternoon, the fragile winter sun broke through the clouds, casting a pale, watery light over the estate. Camilla, bored and restless, declared she wished to see the falcons. She swept into the mews with the Duke in her wake, a vision in deep blue velvet, her voice carrying on the crisp air. "Oh, Nicholas, he is magnificent," she exclaimed, stopping a safe distance from Storm's perch. "But so fierce. Does he never soften?" "He is not a lapdog, Camilla," the Duke said, his voice flat. He was fitting a new leather dress to a smaller peregrine, his movements economical and precise. "Of course not. But surely he shows you some affection. He must know his master. He knows his perch and his lure. It is enough." Pippa was there, tasked with the menial job of scrubbing the stone floors of the mews. She worked at the far end, her head down, her movements small and quiet, trying to make herself a part of the stonework. She could feel Camilla's eyes on her, a brief, dismissive flicker. It was a familiar feeling, the sensation of being seen and judged, wanting in the same instant. Camilla turned her charms back to the Duke, a dazzling smile in place. Perhaps he needs a woman's touch. She took a tentative step forward. The gerfalcon watched her, its dark eyes unblinking, the feathers on its neck ruffled. A low, guttural sound came from its throat. Camilla froze, her smile faltering. "Oh, he does not seem to like me." "He tolerates no one," the Duke said, not looking up from his task. "Step back." She did so, with a little laugh that did not quite cover her fear. The moment passed. The Duke finished his work, and the party moved on, their voices fading. Pippa remained. The mews fell silent, filled only with the scent of hay and bird, and the soft rustle of feathers. She finished her scrubbing and rose, her back aching. She moved past the row of perches, her eyes on the ground. But as she drew level with the great white falcon, she paused. Storm was watching her, not with the aggressive glare he had given Camilla, but with an intense, unnervous curiosity. She stopped. The world seemed to shrink to the space between them. She did not know why, but a tune rose in her throat. It was a simple, haunting melody, a fragment of a song she could not fully remember. She began to hum it softly, under her breath. The falcon tilted its head. The aggressive posture softened. The feathers on its neck settled. It was just watching her, listening. A strange feeling washed over Pippa, a sense of recognition so deep it felt like a physical ache. It was a feeling from the ghost world of her memory, a connection to something she had lost, but her very bones had not forgotten. She did not move. She did not breathe. She just hummed, her eyes locked with the wild creatures. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. She did not know that she was being observed. From the shadows of the tack-room doorway, the Duke of Velmore stood perfectly still. He had returned for a forgotten glove. He had been about to speak, to order her out, but he had stopped. He had seen the entire exchange. He had seen his fierce, untouchable bird grow calm under the gaze of a scullery maid. He had heard the low, strange melody and seen the Falcon's reaction. It was impossible. It made no sense. He watched the girl. She was small and thin, dressed in the drab grey of the lowest servants. Her hair, a deep auburn, was ruthlessly scraped back from her face. She was no one. And yet the most formidable creature on his estate was held captive by her quiet presence. Why had she stopped? Why had she hummed that tune? He did not show himself. He slipped back into the shadows and was gone. But for the first time since she had come to Wrenburn, someone had truly seen Pippa. And in that moment, though she did not know it, everything had begun to change. Later that evening, the bell for the scullery rang. It was an impatient, jarring sound. Pippa hurried to answer it, wiping her damp hands on her apron. It was Camilla, standing in the doorway of the servants' passage, her arms crossed. "The silver," Camilla said, her voice clipped. "The dessert service. It was not polished to your usual standard, Pippa." Pippa's heart sank. She had polished it herself that afternoon, until her arms ached. "I am sorry, miss. I thought I had—" "You thought wrong." Camilla's eyes were cold. There was a distinct tarnish on the handle of the cake slice, the Duchess noticed. It was embarrassing. The Duchess was not even in residence. It was a lie, a casual, effortless lie designed to wound. "It will not happen again, miss," Pippa said, her voice barely a whisper. "See that it doesn't." Camilla looked her up and down, a faint, cruel smile playing on her lips. "One begins to wonder if your hands are simply too coarse for such delicate work. Perhaps the stables would be more suitable." She turned and swept away, leaving Pippa standing in the cold passage. The lie was a stone dropped into the placid surface of her day. She did not cry. She simply absorbed it, another small piece of evidence of her place in this house. She returned to the scullery, picked up a piece of cutlery and a soft cloth, and began to polish, her movements automatic. She would do it all again. She would make it perfect. She would give them no reason to notice her. But it was already too late for that. In his study, 2 floors above, the Duke of Velmore sat staring into the fire. The image of the girl and the Falcon burned into his mind. He was a man who believed in logic, in bloodlines, in tangible things. What he had seen defied all of it. And he was not a man who could let a mystery lie. The next morning, an order was sent down to the kitchens. It was delivered by the Duke's own valet, which was in itself a cause for commotion. The scullery maid, Pippa, was to report to the Mews. She was to be reassigned to assist Mr. Finch, the head falconer. Effective immediately. The news rippled through the servants' hall like a shock wave. Mrs. Gable was flustered. The other maids were abuzz with speculation. A scullery maid sent to the Mews to work with the Duke's precious birds. It was unheard of. It was scandalous. Pippa received the news in stunned silence. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her carefully constructed composure. The news meant proximity to the Duke. It meant being out in the open, visible. It was the last thing on earth she wanted. Her mind raced. Had she done something wrong? Was this a punishment? Was it Camilla's doing? A more refined cruelty than simply sending her to the stables? Well, go on, girl, Mrs. Gable urged, her face a mixture of confusion and anxiety. Don't keep his grace waiting. Pippa curtsied, her movements stiff. She smoothed her worn apron, a useless gesture, and walked out of the warm, familiar world of the kitchens and into the cold, bright uncertainty of the courtyard. Every step felt like a step toward a precipice. Mr. Finch, a wiry man with skin like tanned leather and eyes that squinted from years of staring into the sun, was waiting for her. He looked her up and down with open skepticism. "You're the girl? From the kitchens?" he asked, his tone dubious. "Yes, sir. Pippa?" "Right," he grunted, clearly unimpressed. "Don't know what his grace is thinking, but orders are orders. You'll do as I say. You'll not touch a bird without my say-so, and you'll stay out of the way. Your job is to clean. The perches, the floors, the baths. Can you manage that?" "Yes, sir," she said, relieved. Cleaning. Cleaning, she understood. It was a shield. She could make herself busy, invisible. Her new life began. It was a life lived in the open air, the sharp, clean scent of the moors replacing the damp confinement of the scullery. She learned the rhythms of the mews, the timings of the feedings, the meticulous care of the equipment. She swept and scrubbed with the same silent diligence she had applied to the pots and pans. She kept her head down and her mouth shut. And she was near the birds. She could not help but watch them, the fierce merlins, the swift peregrines, and always Storm. The great Falcon sat on his high perch like a sentinel, his white plumage stark against the grey stone. He watched her as she worked. And sometimes, when she was alone, she would hum the fragment of a melody, the ghost tune from her past. Each time she did, the bird would fall still, its dark eyes fixed on her. The Duke was often there. He would appear without a sound, a tall, dark figure leaning against a stone pillar, observing. He rarely spoke to her, but she felt his eyes on her constantly. It was a heavy, unnerving gaze, analytical and intense. He was watching her, waiting. What for, she did not know. One afternoon, a week into her new duties, she was cleaning the large stone basin that served as the Falcon's bath. It was empty, and she was scrubbing the algae from its sides. Storm was on his perch nearby, restless. Mr. Finch had gone to the forge to see about a broken clasp. She was alone. The Falcon let out a sharp, impatient cry. It launched itself from the perch in a powerful surge of wings and landed on the rim of the basin, just feet from her. Pippa froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the bird that had crippled a man's arm. She stayed perfectly still, her hands in the cold, grimy water. She did not look at him directly, remembering the old falconer's lore from her childhood. Never challenge a hawk with your eyes. She began to hum. Softly. The tune felt like a prayer in her throat. Storm watched her, his head cocked. He took a hesitant step along the stone rim, then another. He was closer now. She could see the perfect, lethal curve of his beak, the intricate pattern of the faint grey barring on his white feathers. He was no longer a symbol of fear, but a living, breathing creature of terrible beauty. Slowly, without thinking, she lifted her hand from the water. Her arm was covered to the elbow by a rough woolen sleeve, damp and grey. She did not extend it toward him. She simply held it out, steady, a perch of her own making. An invitation. It was an act of pure instinct, a gesture that came from that buried part of herself. The world held its breath. The gerfalcon shuffled its feet. It looked at her arm, then at her face. It let out a soft, questioning chirr, a sound utterly unlike its usual harsh cries. And then, with a grace that belied its power, it hopped from the stone rim and settled onto her arm. His weight was substantial, solid. His talons, sharp as needles, pricked through the thick wool, but they did not grip with force. They rested. Pippa stood, unmoving, a living statue, the most dangerous bird in Northumberland, perched calmly on her arm. A tear she did not know she was holding escaped and traced a cold path down her cheek. Do not move. The voice was low, right behind her. The Duke. She hadn't heard him approach. She couldn't have moved if she had wanted to. She was barely breathing. He came to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the bird. He looked at Storm, then at her. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the granite facade. It was not surprise, precisely. It was something more. Confirmation. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice quiet, so as not to startle the bird. "Pippa, Your Grace." He was silent for a long moment. His grey eyes searched her face, truly seeing it for the first time. He saw the fine bones, the wide-set hazel eyes, the dusting of freckles across her nose. He saw the tear track on her cheek. "No," he said, with a strange finality. "That is not your name?" Before she could process his words, he reached out, his hand moving with infinite slowness, and stroked the falcon's breast feathers. The bird allowed the touch, its eyes still on Pippa. Mr. Finch returned then, and stopped dead in the courtyard, his mouth agape at the impossible sight. The Duke took in the falconer's stunned expression. He looked back at Pippa, a silent command in his eyes. He lifted his own gloved hand, and she, understanding, moved her arm next to his. With a small encouragement from the Duke, Storm hopped from her arm to his master's gauntlet, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "See that she is given a proper gauntlet and jesses, Finch," the Duke ordered, his voice returning to its usual, clipped authority. "She will be flying him with me tomorrow." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Pippa and the head falconer in a state of shared, silent shock. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. The Duke's order echoed through the servant hierarchy of Wrenburn. The scullery maid was not just working in the mews. She was to fly the Duke's own falcon. It was more than unusual. It was a breach of the natural order of things. Whispers followed Pippa wherever she went. She was a witch, some said. She had cast a spell on the bird, and perhaps on the Duke himself. Camilla was incandescent with fury. She cornered Pippa in the boot room, her voice a venomous hiss. "What trick did you play?" she demanded. "What did you do?" "Nothing, miss," Pippa said, her voice steady. She was no longer as afraid. Something had shifted in her the moment the Falcon landed on her arm. A piece of her lost self had clicked back into place. "Do not lie to me," Camilla spat. "You are a kitchen maid. That bird is a killer. You did something." "Perhaps he simply does not care for artifice, Miss Cromer," Pippa said, her eyes meeting Camilla's directly for the first time. The small act of defiance struck Camilla silent. She stared, momentarily speechless, at this new version of the girl she had so enjoyed tormenting. Then her lips thinned into a venomous line. "Your insolence will be your undoing. Do not imagine for a moment that this promotion makes you anything other than what you are. A charity case. A nobody." She swept out, but her threat hung in the air. Pippa knew Camilla would not let this rest. The next day, a package arrived for Pippa. Inside was a soft leather gauntlet, perfectly sized for her hand, and a simple, dark green woolen dress. It was a practical garment, made for walking the moors, but it was new and well made. There was no note, but she knew it came from the Duke. Putting it on, she felt as though she were shedding a skin. The drab grey of the scullery was gone. When she looked in the small, cracked mirror in her attic room, the girl staring back was a stranger, someone closer to the ghost girl of her memories. She met the Duke in the courtyard. He was already there with Storm on his fist. He gave her a brief, assessing glance, his eyes lingering for a fraction of a second on the new dress. He gave a curt nod. "Finch has shown you how to hold him?" "Yes, Your Grace. He is yours for the flight. Do not fail him." He transferred the great bird to her arm. Storm settled onto the new gauntlet, his grip firm and sure. He felt like an extension of her own body. They walked in silence, away from the house and up towards the high open moorland. The wind was a living thing up here, cold and clean. It whipped her hair from its severe bun and brought colour to her cheeks. For the first time in years, she felt free. "The wind is from the west," the Duke said, breaking the silence. "He will climb quickly. When I give the signal, unhood him and cast him off." She nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. They reached the crest of a hill that overlooked a wide, empty valley. Below, a gamekeeper released a lure. "Now!" the Duke commanded. With trembling fingers, Pippa slipped the small leather hood from Storm's head. The Falcon's eyes, suddenly exposed to the vastness of the sky, widened. He saw the lure far below. With a cry that was pure, wild joy, he sprang from her glove. His powerful wings caught the wind, and he rose, circling higher and higher, a white speck against the grey canvas of the sky. Pippa watched, breathless, her head thrown back. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "He flies for you," the Duke said, his voice quiet beside her. She looked at him. The wind had tousled his dark hair. The cold had softened the severe lines of his face. In his eyes, she saw not the aloof duke, but the man, watching the bird with a fierce, unguarded love. "My father. He loved to fly hawks," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. It was the first piece of her past she had ever offered to anyone. His gaze snapped to hers. "Your father?" She faltered, realizing her mistake. "He was a farmer, on a nearby estate, a long time ago." It was a clumsy, partial lie. The Duke did not press her, but his expression was thoughtful, his eyes searching. He knew she was hiding something. He had known it from the moment he saw her with the bird. The afternoon was a strange, suspended dream. They flew the Falcon, they walked the moors, and for the first time they spoke. He asked her questions, not about her past, but about the bird, about the wind, about the land. He listened to her answers with a focused intensity that was both unnerving and deeply flattering. She, in turn, found herself speaking with a confidence she did not know she possessed. She spoke of the way the light changed on the hills, of the signs that foretold a change in the weather, things she had absorbed without ever realizing it. They were things a person who lived on the land knew, not a person who lived in a scullery. The Duke's mother, the Dowager Duchess of Velmore, arrived a week later. Hortense, Duchess of Velmore, was a formidable woman in her 60s, with eyes as sharp and intelligent as her son's, but warmed by a shrewd humour. She had come to Wrenburn for the Christmastide season, and her arrival set the house on its ear. Hortense missed nothing. Within a day, she had assessed the situation. Her son's strange, silent preoccupation, Camilla's barely concealed hostility, and the sudden elevation of a servant girl. She summoned Pippa to the library one evening, on the pretext of needing a book from a high shelf. The library was the Duke's sanctuary, a warm, fire-lit room lined with thousands of books, smelling of leather and beeswax. Pippa had never been inside it before. "There," the Duchess said, pointing, "the volume on Charlemagne. My eyes are not what they were." Pippa climbed the ladder and retrieved the heavy tome. As she handed it to the older woman, the Duchess took her hand, turning it over to look at her palm. "These are not the hands of a scullery maid," Hortense said, her gaze sharp. "Not any more. They are healing, but the memory of the work is still there." She looked up, her eyes meeting Pippa's. "My son has taken an interest in you. This is a dangerous thing for a girl in your position." "I have done nothing to invite it, Your Grace," Pippa said quietly. "Oh, I am sure you have not," the Duchess said, with a wry twist of her lips. "That is precisely what fascinates him. Nicholas is a man surrounded by people who want something from him. You, it seems, want only to be left alone. It is a novelty." She paused, her expression softening. "You handle his Falcon." "Yes, Your Grace." "Tell me, child, where did you learn of such things?" Pippa's guard went up. I have only done as Mr. Finch has shown me." The Duchess smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Of course. That will be all, child. You may go." Pippa curtsied and left, her heart beating fast. The Duchess knew. She did not know what she knew, But she saw that there was more to Pippa than met the eye. She had found an unlikely and powerful ally. That night, Nicholas sat in his study. The fire had burned low. He was not reading. He was thinking about the girl. My father? He loved to fly hawks. Her words echoed in his mind. It was a crack, a tiny fissure in the wall she had built around herself. He was a man of logic and lineage. He understood the world through history, through the papers and deeds that charted the course of his family. His fascination with the girl was an anomaly, an equation he could not solve. On an impulse, he rose and went to a tall, locked cabinet in the corner of the room. From it, he took a heavy, leather-bound book. It was his father's last journal, from the year before he died. He had read it once, in the raw aftermath of his father's death, but had found it rambling and melancholic. Now he opened it with a new purpose. He sat by the fire and began to read, searching for a clue, a name, anything. Much of it was as he remembered. Notes on estate management, complaints about the government, laments on the changing times. But then he found it, a series of entries dated some 15 years prior. October 5th, rode with Whitmont today. A finer friend no man ever had. His new peregrine is a marvel. His daughter, little Philippa, has the gift. She is fearless with the birds, a true child of the moors. Nicholas's breath caught. Whitmont. The name was familiar. They had been neighbours, he knew that. Lord Whitmont. His estate had bordered Wrenburn. He read on, his heart beginning to beat faster. October 29th. Disaster. An accusation from London. Treason. It is impossible. Alastair Whitmont is the most loyal man in the kingdom. It is the work of his rival, that devil Malvern. A political assassination. November 12th. The worst has happened. Alastair is ruined. His name disgraced. His lands forfeit to the crown. I cannot bear it. And little Philippa, left with nothing. Nicholas stared at the page, the spidery script blurring before his eyes. Philippa. A daughter named Philippa. He turned the pages with a growing sense of dread. He found a later entry from the following spring. March 20th. I have done what I can. I have purchased Wrenburn from the Crown. At least it will not fall into Malvern's hands. I will hold it. For the girl. It is her birthright. I have given my word to Alastair's ghost. When she is of age, it will be restored. For now, the Cromer relations have taken her in. They seem adequate. The journal fell from his hands. It all clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. Wrenburn. This house, his house, was not his at all. It was hers. Philippa Whitmont. Pippa. The girl with the falconer's hands and the ghost tune on her lips. The Cromers, Camilla's family, were her guardians. Guardians who had raised her as a servant, stripped her of her name, and buried her identity. He felt a wave of cold fury, followed by a profound and bitter shame. His father had made a promise, a sacred vow to a dead friend, and that promise had been broken. It had died with him, buried under the weight of years and silence. He looked into the fire, his face grim. He now understood the source of his fascination. It was not just the mystery of her. It was the pull of a deep, uncorrected injustice. An injustice that had been allowed to fester under his own roof. He knew what he had to do, but he could not act on the word of a journal alone. He needed proof. and he needed to understand the depth of the betrayal. The next day he sought her out. He found her in the mews, oiling a set of leather jesses. Storm was on a perch nearby, watching her with his usual intensity. "Walk with me," he said. It was not a request. They walked the same path up to the moor, the falcon on his fist this time. The air was cold and still. "You lied to me," he said, without preamble. She stopped, her face pale. "Your Grace, your father was not a farmer." He watched her, his gaze unwavering. "He was Alastair Whitmont, and you are Philippa." He did not say it as a question. He said it as a fact. The silence that followed was vast, filled only by the sighing of the wind. She stared at him, her hazel eyes wide with shock and fear. The walls she had built so carefully over so many years were crumbling around her. "How?" she whispered. "My father's journal," he said. He saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, quickly extinguished. "He intended to restore this land to you. He bought it to protect it for you." She lowered her gaze to the frozen ground. "He died, and his promise died with him." There was no bitterness in her voice, only a flat, tired acceptance of fact. "No," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. "A promise like that does not die." He saw the struggle in her face, the years of ingrained caution warring with a desperate need to trust. "Camilla's parents, they took me in after my father, after he was gone. They told me my name was a shame, that the Whitmonts were traitors, that to survive, I had to forget. I had to be small. I had to be Pippa." "They lied to you," Nicholas said, his voice a low growl. "They stole your name. They stole your home." "It was their price for protecting me," she said, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. That was not protection. That was imprisonment. He took a step closer. He wanted to reach out, to touch her, to offer some comfort, but he did not. It was not his place. Not yet. Instead, he made a decision. He started calling her Philippa. The first time he said it in front of anyone else was in the mews. Mr. Finch was there, and 2 of the stable boys. "Philippa," he said, his voice clear and deliberate, "would you bring me the lure?" The name dropped into the quiet air of the mews like a stone. Mr. Finch looked up, confused. The stable boys exchanged glances. Philippa froze for a heartbeat, then moved to do his bidding. A flush of colour had risen in her cheeks. It was a small thing, the use of a name, but it was a revolution. It was the first stone being pried loose from the wall of her prison. Camilla heard of it, of course. The whispers reached her within the hour. The Duke was calling the scullery maid Philippa. She felt a primal surge of panic. The secret she had been raised to keep, the foundation of her entire life and position, was under threat. The nobody was becoming a somebody. She had to act. She had to remove her. Permanently. Her plan was simple and cruel. The Dowager Duchess had a set of pearl earrings she was fond of, which she sometimes left on her dressing table. Camilla, using her intimate knowledge of the house, slipped into the Duchess's rooms while she was out walking. She took one of the earrings, and later that day concealed it in the pocket of the old grey dress Philippa had left in her attic room. That evening she went to the Duchess, her face a mask of distress. "Dearest Duchess," she said, her voice trembling. "A terrible thing. I know you will not want to believe it, but I saw her. The girl, Philippa. I saw her leaving your rooms this afternoon. And now, your earring is missing." Hortense looked at Camilla, her expression unreadable. "Indeed. A serious accusation, Camilla." "I would not make it if I were not certain," Camilla said, pressing her advantage. "She has grown bold. His Grace's favour has gone to her head. Who knows what else she might be capable of?" The Duchess summoned Mrs. Gable. A search was organised. Camilla, feigning reluctance, suggested they look in Philippa's room. "One would not wish to accuse her unfairly," she said, the very picture of false sincerity. The earring was, of course, found, tucked away in the pocket of the old dress. It seemed like undeniable proof. Mrs. Gable was horrified. Camilla looked sadly triumphant. Philippa was brought before them in the dowager's drawing room. She stood before the three women, her face pale but her expression calm. "I did not take it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The evidence suggests otherwise, girl," Mrs. Gable said sternly, though her eyes were filled with a pained confusion. "The evidence has been planted," Philippa said, her gaze fixed on Camilla. Camilla let out a gasp of theatrical shock. "How dare you? You are not only a thief, but a liar as well." The scene was interrupted by the door opening. The Duke stood there. He had been told of the commotion. He looked from his mother to Camilla, and then to Philippa. His face was a thundercloud. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Camilla repeated her story, her voice filled with righteous indignation. She pointed to the earring, which sat on the table like a malevolent pearl. Nicholas listened without expression. When she was finished, he did not look at the earring. He looked at Philippa. "Did you take this?" he asked. "No, Your Grace," she said. He held her gaze for one long, silent moment. Then he turned to Camilla. His voice, when he spoke, was as cold as the winter wind. "Philippa was with me all afternoon," he said, the lie as smooth and sharp as glass. "We were on the far side of the West Moor. She did not set foot in this house until after 5 o'clock. The Duchess was already back in her rooms by then. So tell me, Camilla, how could you have seen her?" The room fell utterly silent. Camilla's face went white. She had been caught in a lie so blatant, so easily disproven, that there was no escape. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The Duke took a step toward her. "You would stoop to this, to frame an innocent girl, a member of my household, out of spite and jealousy?" I thought," she stammered. "You thought I would believe you," he finished for her, his voice dripping with contempt. "You thought I was a fool." He turned to his mother. "My apologies, Mother, that you were subjected to this performance. Mrs. Gable, please ensure the girl is not disturbed further." He held the door for Philippa. As she passed him, his eyes met hers. In them she saw a cold, protective fury that took her breath away. He had not just defended her. He had lied for her. He had chosen her side, publicly and irrevocably. The balance of power in Wrenburn had shattered. The Duke's public defence of Philippa sent a tremor through the house, but its deepest impact was on Nicholas himself. The blatant, vicious nature of Camilla's attempt to frame Philippa had solidified his resolve. This was no longer just about righting a historical wrong. It was about protecting a living, breathing person from a clear and present danger. His father's passive promise was not enough. Action was required. That night, he did not sleep. He returned to his father's study, the journal open on the desk beside him. The entries were a map to a crime, but they were not proof. His father had written of holding Wrenburn in trust, but where was the documentation? A man as meticulous as his father would not have left such a momentous obligation to a mere journal entry. There had to be more. A deed, a letter, a legal instrument of some kind. He began to search the room methodically. He ran his hands along the endless shelves of books, tapping the wood paneling, searching for a hollow sound. He emptied drawers, sifting through decades of forgotten estate papers, receipts, and correspondence. Nothing. As the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 3, he slumped into his father's chair, frustrated and weary. His eyes fell upon the desk. It was a massive, ornate piece of mahogany, a partner desk with drawers on both sides. He had used it for 2 years, but he had only ever used his own side. On an impulse, he circled around to the side that faced the wall, a space that hadn't been touched in years. The drawers were locked. He found the key on his father's old ring, a heavy brass thing he kept in a display case. The first drawer opened with a reluctant creak. It was filled with more papers, old maps of the estate. The second, the same. He pulled open the deep bottom drawer. It seemed empty. He ran his hand along the inside, feeling for a false bottom. His fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible catch on the side panel. He pressed it. With a soft click, a section of the drawer's side swung inward, revealing a narrow, hidden compartment. His heart hammered. Inside lay a slim portfolio tied with a faded blue ribbon. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it out. He untied the ribbon and spread the contents on the desk under the light of the oil lamp. There were 2 documents. The first was a letter, several pages long, in his father's hand. It was addressed to Mr. Alistair Whitmont. It was dated only a week after the journal entry, where he had recorded the purchase of Wrenburn. "My dearest Alistair," it began, "I write this into the void, a prayer that you are safe, though I know you are not. I cannot undo the monstrous injustice that has been done to you, my friend. Malvern has won, and our world is the poorer for it. But I swear on my life, and on the honor of my house, he will not have everything. He will not have Wrenburn. I have done a thing which may seem a betrayal, but you must trust it is the only path I saw. I have purchased your home. It is now, legally, mine. But in the eyes of God, it is, and always will be, yours. I will be its steward, its guardian. I will hold it in trust for your daughter, for little Philippa. When she comes of age, or when this political madness has passed, and your name can be cleared, I will sign it over to her, free and clear. The enclosed deed is a testament to this vow." It is a deed of transfer, from me to her, lacking only a date and my final signature. It is my promise made tangible. I have sent word to your Cromer cousins. They have agreed to take Philippa in. It is not ideal, but it is the best I can do to keep her safe and close. I will watch over her. She will not be forgotten. Yours in eternal friendship, Velmore. Nicholas read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through a film of moisture in his eyes. It was all there, the proof, the motive, the sacred, broken promise. His father had not been passive. He had been strategic, loyal, and loving. But he had died too soon, and the Cromers, entrusted with the care of a child, had instead become her jailers. He picked up the second document. It was the deed of transfer, just as the letter described. A legal document drawn up by his father's solicitors, transferring ownership of the Wrenburn estate and all its holdings to one Miss Philippa Whitmont. All it needed was a date and a signature. A cold, clear purpose settled over him. He knew exactly what he had to do. He would not simply give her the deed. The injustice was too public, the humiliation too deep. The truth had to be brought into the light, not passed along in a quiet transaction. Camilla had to face not just him, but the truth of her family's legacy, of greed and fear. And Philippa had to be given back her name in the same house where it had been stolen from her. He did not act the next day, or the day after. He allowed the tension in the house to simmer. He treated Philippa with a quiet, formal respect that was more shocking to the household than any outburst would have been. He continued to fly the Falcon with her, their silent companionship on the moors a world away from the suffocating atmosphere of the house. He saw the questioning hope in her eyes and the growing panic in Camilla's. Then he made his move. He sent a note to his mother. He then requested the presence of Miss Cromer at dinner that evening, and he sent a separate, formal request to Philippa. Not a summons, but an invitation. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, understood immediately. She went to Philippa's small attic room. In her hands, she carried a dress box. "Tonight, you will dine with us," Hortense said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You will not be there as a servant, Philippa. You will be there as my son's guest." She opened the box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a gown of simple, elegant grey silk. It had a high neck and long sleeves, utterly modest, but the fabric shimmered in the low light. It was the colour of a dove's wing, of a settled evening sky. With it was a simple silver chain, a single pearl hanging from it. "My son believes that dignity outlasts cruelty," the Duchess said softly, looking at Philippa's stunned face. "Tonight, you will wear yours for all to see." When Philippa came down the main staircase that evening, the few servants who saw her stopped and stared. She was transformed. The simple, perfectly cut gown gave her a grace she had always possessed, but had been forced to conceal. Her deep auburn hair was not scraped back, but coiled in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. She looked poised, serene, and beautiful. She looked like the lady of a great house. She entered the small dining room. A fire crackled in the hearth. The long, formal dining table had been replaced by a smaller, round one, a change Nicholas had ordered. It created an intimacy that was immediately unnerving. The Duke was there, standing by the fire. His mother was seated. And Camilla was there, a thunderous expression on her face, a gown of vibrant, defiant, crimson-looking, suddenly garish in the quiet room. Camilla's eyes widened in disbelief as Philippa entered. "What is the meaning of this? Why is she here?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "Philippa is our guest for dinner this evening, Camilla," Nicholas said, his voice level. He pulled out a chair for Philippa, a gesture of courtesy so profound in its context that it was like a slap in the face to his ward. Philippa sat, her hands folded in her lap. She felt strangely calm. The fear that had been her constant companion for 15 years was gone, replaced by a quiet, waiting stillness. The dinner was an excruciating affair. The first course was served and eaten in a silence thick with unspoken animosity. Camilla pushed her food around her plate, her eyes darting from Nicholas to Philippa and back again, a cornered animal searching for an escape. The Duchess ate with a placid, observant air. Nicholas seemed to be waiting. When the plates were cleared, he did not signal for the next course. He placed the leather portfolio on the table. "I have been spending some time in my father's study of late," he began, his voice conversational, but with an edge of steel. Rereading his journals. He wrote often of his friendship with his neighbour, Lord Whitmont. At the mention of the name, Camilla flinched. A fork clattered from her hand onto the plate. "They were falconers together," Nicholas continued, his eyes fixed on Camilla's pale face. "My father considered him the finest man he knew. He wrote of his devastation when Lord Whitmont was falsely accused of treason and his name destroyed." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. He also wrote of Lord Whitmont's daughter, a little girl he was fond of, a girl named Philippa. Camilla made a small, choked sound. "My father, it seems, bought this house to save it," Nicholas went on, his voice growing colder. "He bought it to hold in trust for that little girl. He left explicit instructions, a promise in writing, that Wrenburn would be returned to her, its rightful owner, when the time was right." He opened the portfolio and slid the letter across the polished wood of the table toward Camilla. "This is his letter, confirming that vow." Camilla stared at the elegant, faded script of the man who had been her benefactor. She did not touch it. She looked trapped, her breathing shallow. He entrusted her care to her relatives. "Your parents, Camilla," the Duke said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, but each word was a hammer blow. He trusted them to protect her. Instead, they buried her. They stole her name, her past, her future. They raised her as a servant in her own home, living off the patronage of my family, while the true heiress scrubbed their floors. He looked at Philippa then, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. Then his gaze returned to Camilla, hard as granite. All so they could secure a comfortable life for themselves and a good position for their own daughter. It was then that Camilla broke. But it was not a scream or a denial. It was a collapse. A terrible, silent crumbling. Tears streamed down her face, washing away the carefully constructed mask of beauty and arrogance. "We were afraid," she whispered, the words ragged. "My father? He had debts. We had nothing. When Lord Velmore died, my parents were terrified. They thought you would find out, that you would cast us out. They said she had to forget. It was the only way. The only way to be safe." Her voice dissolved into a shuddering sob. I was a child. I did what I was told. And then I just kept doing it. I was so afraid of going back, of having nothing. It was a confession, born not of remorse, but of pure, pathetic fear. And in that moment, she was no longer a monster. She was just a woman whose entire life had been built on a foundation of terror and lies, a foundation that had just been washed away. It was not satisfying. It was deeply, profoundly sad. The Duchess watched her, her face filled not with triumph, but with a weary pity. Nicholas let the silence stretch. Finally, he spoke, his voice devoid of anger, filled only with a quiet finality. The fraud is at an end, Camilla. He pushed the second document, the deed, across the table. He picked up a pen from a small side table, dipped it in ink, and held it out. Not to Camilla, but to Philippa. "Wrenburn is yours, Philippa," he said, his voice low and steady. "It has always been yours." He was not signing it. He was giving her the power, the choice. Philippa looked at the pen. She looked at the deed bearing her name. She looked at the weeping, broken woman who had been her tormentor. And she looked at the Duke, who was watching her with an expression of profound, respectful expectation. Slowly she reached out and took the pen. The aftermath was quiet. There were no public recriminations, no grand dramas. Nicholas, true to his word, handled Camilla's departure with a quiet discretion that felt more like a sad duty than a victory. He offered her the choice he had planned, a small, remote property on the coast, with an income sufficient for a modest, solitary life. The alternative was public disgrace and utter ruin. She accepted, her face pale and her eyes empty. She left Wrenburn 2 days later, a ghost departing the house she had haunted for so long. Her defeat was not a spectacle. It was an erasure. For Philippa, the change was both immense and subtle. She was now Miss Whitmont, the mistress of Wrenburn. The servants, led by a deeply remorseful Mrs. Gable, now curtsied to her. She had access to every room, every account book, every key. The house was hers. But she did not change. She did not suddenly adopt the airs of a grand lady. She rose at the same hour. She spoke in the same quiet, measured tones. Her first act as mistress was not to redecorate the drawing-room, but to walk the estate with the head groundskeeper, discussing the crop rotations and the necessary repairs to the tenant cottages. She shortened the long, cold dinner table in the main dining room permanently, just as Nicholas had. She sought out Thomas, the footman, and made an arrangement to pay for his sister's passage from Newcastle and find her a position at the house. Her authority came not from her title, but from her innate competence and her quiet, observant nature. The small truths she had once collected as a shield she now used as tools to govern, with kindness and practicality. The house, which had long held its breath under the Duke's grief and Camilla's brittle tyranny, began to exhale. It felt different, lighter. Nicholas retreated to his own neighbouring estate, Blackwood Manor, which now bordered hers. He gave her space. He understood that she needed time to inhabit her own life, to reclaim the identity that had been stolen from her. He sent no effusive letters, made no grand romantic gestures. He simply made it known, through his steward, that if she required any counsel or assistance, he was at her disposal. He was her neighbour. He was her friend. He watched her from a distance. He saw the way Wrenburn began to thrive under her care. He saw the genuine respect in the faces of her tenants. He saw the way she still sought the solitude of the moors, though now she walked them not as a servant, but as their master. They still flew the falcons together. It became their ritual. Twice a week he would ride over, and they would walk the high ground, storm a white sentinel on one of their fists. In the vast, wind-swept silence of the moors, they were not the Duke of Velmore and the heiress of Wrenburn. They were simply Nicholas and Philippa. Their conversations were rarely about the past. They spoke of the land, of the birds, of the future. He found himself telling her things he had never told another soul, about his difficult relationship with his father, his loneliness after his death, the crushing weight of a title he had never truly wanted. She listened, her hazel eyes full of a deep, quiet understanding. She did not offer solutions or platitudes. She simply witnessed his truth, and in her calm presence, he felt a burden lift from him that he had carried for years. He was not her savior. He was simply a man, being seen by a woman who knew the cost of being invisible. Love for them was not a sudden storm. It was a slow, quiet sunrise, spreading light and warmth over a landscape that had been cold for a very long time. It was a chosen act, built on a foundation of shared silence, mutual respect, and a truth that had been patiently unearthed. Months passed. Winter thawed into a wet green spring, and spring bloomed into a glorious summer. The moors were no longer grey and brown, but a riot of purple heather and green bracken. One warm July afternoon, they stood on the same crest of the hill where they had first flown storm together. The Falcon circled high above them in the brilliant blue sky, a speck of white against the infinite canvas. "My father's letter," Philippa said, her voice soft. "He asked his friend to watch over me. He said I would not be forgotten." She looked at Nicholas, a gentle smile on her lips. "You kept his promise." "My father made the promise," Nicholas said, his voice rough with emotion. "I only corrected the error of its keeping. The honor was his." He paused, turning to face her fully. "Philippa, I have spent my life surrounded by duty, by obligation, by the weight of a name. You are the first thing, the first person, that has ever felt like a choice." He reached out and took her hand. His was warm and strong. "I did not save you, Philippa. You saved yourself. I simply opened the door, and in doing so, I found a way out of my own prison." He looked into her eyes, his own grey eyes, clear and full of a light she had never seen there before. "I am not offering you a dukedom. I am not offering you amends. I am asking if you will share your life with me. As my wife. As my equal. As the woman I love." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The almost. But it was more than enough. She did not need to think. Her heart had known the answer for months. "Yes, Nicholas," she said, her voice clear and sure. "Yes." He did smile then, a true, unguarded smile that transformed his severe face. He lifted her hand to his lips. Above them, the Falcon let out a single piercing cry of freedom and soared higher into the sunlit sky. Their wedding was a quiet affair, held in the small parish church that served both their estates. The Duchess Hortense was there, her sharp eyes glistening. The servants of Wrenburn lined the path, their faces beaming. The epilogue of their story was not written in grand ballrooms or London society pages. It was written in the everyday rhythms of their life together. It was in the way he would seek her out in the library, not for any reason, but just to be in the same room. It was in the way she would place her hand on his arm in a moment of shared silence. It was in the birth of their son, a boy with his father's grey eyes and his mother's quiet spirit, whom they named Alistair. One evening, years later, Philippa stood at the window of her drawing-room at Wrenburn, watching Nicholas walk across the lawn with their young son on his shoulders. The boy was pointing up at the sky, where a falcon, a descendant of Storm, was circling in the twilight. Nicholas was laughing, a sound that was no longer rare, but as much a part of the house as the scent of wood smoke and old books. She thought of the lost years, of the girl named Pippa who had scrubbed floors in the shadows. There was a bittersweet ache for that girl, for the life she had not been allowed to live. But there was no regret. The path had been hard, but it had led her here. It had forged her. It had taught her that quiet dignity was a shield, that being underestimated was a hidden power, and that love was not a prize to be won, but a sanctuary to be built, stone by patient stone. She had been invisible, and he had been the one to see her. She came anyway. She had always come anyway, and it had made all the difference. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.